So this is a Slido, like a little slide, like a poll. I like to do these before presentations. It's anonymous. You don't have to sign up or anything. You can just scan the QR code and just a little poll. How many years of experience do you have? That's the first one. You all could just quickly scan and I can read the room. And I just did a poll around how many people are from outside the UK. Pretty fascinating to see. A lot of folks coming from outside, so that's very nice. Right, good mix of people. What are your team's struggles? So this can be anything, be it technical, non-technical, not able to work async, empathy, whatever you like, skills, Kubernetes. That's one big one that I've seen. When I go to events and I'm like, do you know about Kubernetes? They're like, yes, we do. Are you using it? Like, no, we're not. It's too complex, stuff like that. But anyway, okay, good enough. That's nice. Geography, dev engagement, governance, communication. It's very nice to see this because a lot of my points in the talk are too many technologies. Been there. All right. Next one is, what's your favorite restaurant in London? It's a quick one because a lot of people are joining from outside London. So let's give them some recommendation. I like Dishoom because I'm Indian. No, I love Indian food, but yeah, Dishoom is nice. See the Dishoom over there? Nice. I'll check it out after the session. Neat Burger. So Honest Burgers is also really good. In Covent Garden, they have good vegan options. McDonald's. Can't go wrong with McDonald's. McDonald's, Starbucks. All right. So let's move forward. So my name is Kunal. I work as a DevRel manager at Civo, and my talk is about empathy. So don't worry, I'm just not going to just tell you, okay, be a good person. That would be pretty boring. Initially, I was doing a workshop, and then they were like, you have now 20 minutes. Would you like to do a keynote? I was like, wow, I'm really honored, but I couldn't do keynote. I couldn't do a workshop in 20 minutes. So I was like, you know what? A lot of bad things are happening in the world, so let's talk about empathy. But not so long ago, I was, if you don't know, I recently graduated over a year ago. I graduated last year in in September, and then I moved to the UK from India. And I was interning at this little company. It's a web development agency, and they had a little project. And the project was just, building a website for a client, and that's it. Enough information to set the context. And they were developing a feature which I believed was not very user-friendly. Like I was like, okay, you're implementing all these features and stuff, but I think you should focus on the little things rather than perfecting every single thing and ending up like not making a pretty viable product or a pretty to use product. And the guy said that, no, you're just an intern. We're not going to listen to you. Bugger off. These are nice slang words I'm learning in London. So I was like, okay, no problem. And I felt that as well, like, okay, maybe he's right. I'm an intern. I don't have to give my opinions. And then what happened was they launched the product and then they did not get good feedback. And it was like, yeah, the user experience is not very good. So when you talk about empathy, it's about seeing yourself in other people's shoes. It's a quote I really like. Thinking about what other people are feeling, putting yourself in their shoes, learning from their perspectives. I'm going to talk about it in a software development or engineering point of view. If you talk about some of your team struggles that, folks that I see oftentimes face, and communication, that was also listed as one of the ones in the word cloud. So lower team morale, which can lead to negative work environment. It's not good. Poor communication. If you are practicing empathy, then, if you have a good communication, then it's better to sort of like share your perspectives with the team. Product quality, because engaging with the users, listening to what the users want, and then making those changes, just doing your user research and just making the users happy. And inefficient problem solving, that can be another one. All of these things have one thing in common, which is lack of empathy. Before I even get started, I have a quick question, raise of hands, if you think empathy is irrelevant to software engineers. Very good. I was at one conference and this one guy raised his hand up. So that's nice to see, very good audience. All right, so I think it's not, because the previous point, is empathy irrelevant to software engineers? I don't think so, because With software engineering, when you're running a company, you're managing a team as a leader or a manager or whatever, or when you're coding, for example, coding is about delivering messages to people, and wherever you're communicating, wherever communication plays a factor, I think empathy automatically plays a crucial factor. In coding, we'll take a lot of examples. With leadership, we'll take a lot of examples, but I think 100%. So I'm going to divide this talk into 3 parts. The users, so empathy with the users, your teammates, and for the leaders, based on my experiences. All right. So with the users, let's first talk about what prevents empathy. Let's think like, okay, Kunal, you're telling us be a good person. This is pretty self-explanatory stuff, but tell something unique. So tell something how we can identify if our teams are lacking empathy and how to identify which sort of like bias we are working towards. So the first one is called confirmational bias. So confirmational bias, I don't know if you can see it all the very back, but it's the tendency to seek out the information that confirms your pre-existing beliefs or assumptions while ignoring the information that contradicts that particular assumption. Now, developers who face from this bias, they may only seek out user feedback that will confirm their assumptions about like the product, or rather than seeking out some new information that will be like, okay, your assumption was wrong. Now that I think about it, it's also known as ignoring red flags in a relationship. High school flashback, but I think that should help set the tone of what confirmational bias means. So many devs suffer from it as well. Curse of knowledge. I don't know why I put Voldemort. I just Googled curse, so it showed Voldemort. So I just put Voldemort, but also he was really smart, so why not? But yeah, curse of knowledge. Many developers suffer from curse of knowledge. I did as well. It means something like assuming others know what we know. Anyone suffers from this or knows someone who suffers from this or has come across someone who just assumes like you know what they are talking about. So again, developers who suffer from this knowledge may assume that the people already have the understanding of what they're trying to convey, which can lead to products that are difficult to use. Another good example is very terrible documentation. And that's why being a beginner is one of the best skills you can have, because by the way by which you are explaining, it's like from a beginner's point of view. So whenever a beginner reaches out to me, that's what I tell them. But yeah, curse of knowledge, that's another one. Let's get the third one. This is the hindsight bias. So this is basically the tendency to believe that events were more predictable after they have occurred. So after something happened, you're like, oh yeah, I knew that was going to happen. I knew that was going to happen. So developers suffer from this, who believe that the user feedback that they get was like pretty obvious from what they, let's say, initially did not consider during their own development process. But when someone gives them a feedback, they're like, oh yeah, I thought about that. That's good. All right, last one is availability bias. This is the tendency to rely on readily available information while making decisions. And let's say you're not reaching out to newer people. So for example, relying on feedback from a small group of people, but ignoring the feedback that may be difficult to obtain. Now, we can talk about feedback on and on, like how do you get people to fill out your surveys and all sorts of things. In short, make your surveys quick. I think that has worked really well for me. But anyway, so these are the 4 types of biases that people suffer from. All right, so how to apply empathy with users? How do you eliminate these biases? Ideally, first thing is acceptance. So identify that you have these biases within your team or within yourself or whatever. And when we talk about applying empathy with the users, one of the things I'd recommend is creating personas. Now, personas are just like fictional characters that you create based on your research. You did some user research and you're like, okay, this is our product, who's going to interact with it? Why would anyone want to use it? Why would anyone want to pay for it? And would people like this product? Would people like this feature? Is this feature currently necessary? What is the ROI? How much time it would take? So create personas like proof of concepts and stuff like that. And I think that helps a little bit. In addition to surveys, so user surveys, these are pretty basic stuff. So like surveys, sending surveys to your users, community members, and asking for feedback. It's like Paula mentioned, like you can fill the survey for this event as well. User testing, interviews. So if you have any big customers or some potentially big people who have like significant contributions to your projects or community, be that open source projects. So you can do interviews, you can do user feedback with them, and then take their feedback into action. Analytics, again, like analyzing that information, seeing what you're doing wrong, and where you're going wrong, all sorts of things, and focus groups. All right. Now, this is a little map that I like to present, which is the audience and actions map. I just came up with that. It's not called the audience actions map. It's called a map of working with your users. But you get the idea. So identify the individuals and consider the context. So I have a group of users, some of the people who are like, okay, you work at this company, we need this feature. We need you to support eBPF or Talos or something like that. So identify that, the individuals, the context, and what their needs are. After that, you take these three things, and then you apply the action. So what is the best action that you can perform? What is feasible? Like sometimes everything may not be feasible. And creating artifacts. Cool. Moving forward, how much time do I have left? Under 10 minutes. Okay. So section number 2, efficiency, empathy within team members. We spoke about users, and I like to give action items in my presentations. So that's what we're doing. So with teams, conflict resolutions are, sometimes you may wonder why have empathy in teams. I think during conflict resolutions, it helps quite a lot. You're able to understand others' perspectives and resolve conflicts in a more civilized manner. If you're a leader, if you're a manager, I think it's one of the you might sometimes come across a situation like this. So I think what you should do is stop and just focus on how you can apply empathy in that situation. And I think that's the number one, like how you start with conflict resolution, which is empathy. Along with trust, so having empathy within your teammates builds trust. You get to trust more people, you share your concerns. Communication, that plays a crucial role. At the company I work for, Civo, we say that no question is a bad question. No question is a dumb question or a stupid question or whatever. We have just like very open to communication. Creativity, it also boosts creativity. People can be themselves, because with diversity and inclusion, people coming from various cultural backgrounds or whatever, I think that's one of the best positives of why you should have a diverse and culturally diverse team. When people ask that, morale, it boosts morale, like someone is there to listen to you, someone is there to help you, someone is there to listen to your concerns, and overall it increases the efficiency. Strategies for teams, let's talk about that. So actively listening, I think that's one, like actively listen to what your team members have to say. Brings me back to the first story that I was mentioning, like you're an intern, you don't know anything, so they were not actively listening. Putting yourself in other people's shoes, so thinking about what other folks are going through, practicing curiosity. But yeah, the second point is it really played really well during the COVID pandemic, when people started, it was not a good time, right? So I think that was the key highlight of where empathy would be pretty useful, which was during the pandemic. Practicing perspective taking, providing support, so on and so forth. Right. I'm not going to speak much about this, but I want to speak about this thing. Bad code. So sometimes you find very bad code, and the person who wrote that code has left the company. Now you're not going to ring that person up. It's not going to pick up your call. It's left the company. It's not my fault. But yes, have you ever come across a code sample and you're just like, okay, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Who wrote this? Where's that person? And then obviously you can't get in touch with them because they left the company. So what do? Anyone? Yeah. So you can't do anything. Irrespective of coding in life, things that I don't have control over, I would just not worry. That's it. So let's say you have two people. You have John Wick and what's another fictional character? Spider-Man, sure. So you have John Wick and Spider-Man, and they are both preparing for a coding interview. Let's say they both have similar level of intellect or intelligence or whatever. So same interviews, same questions, same mental whatever they have. And Spider-Man, what he's doing is, he's spending 50% of his time preparing for the interview, it's fine. And 50% of the time, worrying about, how the interview go and would I get selected? What would I do if I don't get selected? John Wick, on the other hand, is a man of sheer will, commitment, and focus. So he's spending 100% of his time just preparing for the interview. So who's likely to do better in the interview given that they're both equally intelligent? John Wick, right? So when you find bad code and you're like, okay, who wrote this code? I can't find them. Swap blame for honor. Why do I have a dinosaur here? It's a good question. You know how archaeologists, when they find bones, they're like, okay, these are bones millions of years ago, and it just doesn't make any sense. But they put it together nicely and put it in the Natural History Museum. So that's something you can do with code. If you find bad code, then you can leave the code better than you found it, because there's nothing you can do about it if the person has left, but you can reverse engineer or do whatever, make it better, leave the documentation so that the other people who would see it in the future would thank you. But yeah, empathy over here. So that's empathy for your future, teammates, so on and so forth. And don't forget the docs. I like to say good writing is simple writing. So also when you're making the code better, make sure you're adding nice comments or just adding some documentation, good naming conventions, avoiding complex logic, or actually documenting it. All right, last wrapping up, which is for leaders, empathy for leaders. I'm not a leader. I'm very, just started out with my career, but I have had very nice people who have been my mentor. So this is what I have learned from them. So very important point. Empathetic leaders understand imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome is not a bad thing because it's, again, out of my control. So things I have no control over, I would just not worry. So imposter syndrome, out of my control. No one invites imposter syndrome. And not just beginners. Beginners don't face imposter syndrome. Tom Hanks, he also faces imposter syndrome. I saw one of his interviews. He was doing a movie alongside some other guy, and he was like, I faced imposter syndrome. And when Tom Hanks is facing imposter syndrome, then I don't feel much bad about myself. But empathetic leader understand imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome not a bad thing because you're not inviting it, it just happens. And things that happen naturally, it's fine. I think you should think about, okay, I'm not saying it won't affect you, definitely will, but think about, okay, it happened on its own, I didn't invite it. So the next possible step is what to do. So everyone says, okay, imposter syndrome, very bad thing, happens to everyone, and it just happens, no one invites it. I agree, 100%, but now what are you doing about it? So that's what I mean. From a leader's point of view, you will support your team members, provide them reasonable support, try to understand why they're facing imposter syndrome, and try to cure it or whatever. First point I wanted to mention for leaders. Documentation, this is really something happened with me. When you ask seniors, when you ask some new hire documentation, seniors are like, I'm the documentation. And if you find yourself in an open source project that also doesn't have good documentation, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to be happy contributing to it as such, for example. So if you're maintaining an open source project and, for example, you want newer contributors, I'd say have good docs. Lastly, write readable code. So simple, that's it. I don't know how to explain more of this. Just write readable code, good code, so that it'll help people in the future. Good naming conventions, good logic, avoiding complex logic, documenting, stuff like that. But yeah, lastly, I'd say just this last quote, which is some of the finest leaders are the ones who remember, what it was like to be in other people's shoes when they were first starting out, and how it was like working from the bottom up. So that's what happens in open source communities. Like after 10, 20 years, who's going to maintain Kubernetes? I don't know if Kubernetes will be there in 10, 20 years. Maybe, yes, sure, but whatever will be there, who's going to maintain it? The folks who are just starting out right now, obviously, they'll maintain it. So, yeah. Last question, can empathy be taught? Hands up for yes, hands down for no. Very good. Because it's more than a skill. It's more than a feeling, it's a skill. And just like every other skill, it can be taught by actively listening, communicating effectively, and understanding the emotions and experiences of others. Also, there was a study I forgot to quote, but they did a study on can empathy be taught, then yeah, like from the childhood. Like some people are born with a natural trait, but not everyone is, so it's fine, it can be taught because it's more than a feeling, it's a skill. A time to reflect. So what I'd encourage you to do is think about a time where lack of empathy affected a project or a particular thing you had in mind and how you could have done things differently. This is just for you, but you can share with others as well if you want. And yeah, it just doesn't require that you have been through the same thing, but more about just thinking about where the person is right now, putting yourself in other people's shoes. So I've put this quote because sometimes people are like, I don't know what you're going through, so I can't understand or I can't help it. That's okay. It doesn't require you to be, through exactly the same thing that the other person has been through. So there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. But anyway, that's it. Oh, I'm right on time for once. Nice.